Today we're going to look at contribution. You've probably already come across contribution. It usually gets its first mention when we're talking about break-even. So you should already know that break-even output is your total fixed cost divided by contribution per unit. And that contribution per unit is just the selling price per unit, take away the variable cost per unit. And if we look at an example, if we've got a t-shirt selling for £10 that has got a variable cost of making it of £3, we can say that the contribution per t-shirt is £7. So that's looking at the contribution per unit or per item. You also need to know about the concept of total contribution, and this is just the contribution for all the items that the business is making. And we've already come across that transition between a unit and total when we've looked at revenue. So for example, we've talked about total revenue, and here you can work that out by revenue per unit times quantity sold. And of course, revenue per unit is also the same as selling price. So if we look at an example with our t-shirt business, if they're selling 1,000 t-shirts at £10 each, then the total revenue here is £10,000. We've also come across this transition between variable cost per unit and total variable cost, and it's exactly the same thing. To get to the total variable cost, we're looking at the unit variable cost and we're timesing it by quantity. So another example, so with our t-shirt business still selling 1,000 t-shirts, if its unit variable cost, so the cost per item is £3, then its total variable cost is just £3,000. So now total contribution, and it's exactly the same thing. We're taking the contribution per unit, per item, and multiplying it up by the quantity. So for our example here, selling 1,000 t-shirts, contribution per unit of £7, then the total contribution is £7,000. So from this, hopefully you can see actually that our total contribution can be worked out in a different way as well. Total contribution can be worked out as total revenue minus total variable cost. Because remember, the unit contribution was the selling price minus the unit variable cost. So all you've done is multiply every item there by the quantity being sold. So what this means for us is that we've got another way to work out profit. So depending on the information you might have at your fingertips, you might need to think about how to get to profit in a different way to the basic way that we've already looked at. So we know we've just found out total contribution is total revenue take away total cost. So if you look at the right hand side of that equation, the total revenue minus total variable cost, you've almost got profit. There's one thing missing. So all that is missing from that side of the equation is to take away fixed costs, and then that right hand side would give you profit. So what this means is you can also work out profit by taking your total contribution and taking away the fixed costs. So going back to our t-shirt example, if they've got a total contribution of £7,000, fixed cost of £2,000, then our profit comes in at £5,000. So finally, when would we actually use this term contribution? So I will just show you some examples. So to start with, just setting the scene, we've been talking about selling 1,000 t-shirts, and you can see there that we've got our green variable cost of 3,000 and then the slightly smaller pinky purple fixed cost at 2,000. So those are going to stay fixed all the way through, and then what we're going to look at is just changing the selling price so that we're going to get different revenue and therefore different amounts of profit or loss. So to start with, if we're selling these t-shirts at £10 each, which is what we looked at earlier, we can see our revenue coming in exactly double our variable and fixed costs. So you can see a nice healthy profit. And the way we talk about this would be the business is making a profit of £5,000, or you could say it's making a contribution of £7,000. But it would be most normal in these circumstances to talk about the level of profit. Next example, if these t-shirts are selling for £5 each, so you can probably guess what's going to happen here. We get our revenue coming in, and actually the revenue covers all the variable cost, and then it covers exactly up to the end of the fixed cost. So here we've got £5,000 worth of revenue coming in, which matches our 5,000 total cost. So here you could say the business is breaking even, or you could say it's making a contribution of £2,000. And again, the most normal thing in this situation would be to talk about the business breaking even. So next example, business is now selling its t-shirts for £4 each. So what you can see happening here is it's getting its revenue coming in. It's getting enough revenue to cover all of that 3,000 variable cost, but it's only getting enough revenue to cover half of the 2,000 fixed cost. So in this case, you could say the business is making a contribution of £1,000 because it's eating £1,000 into its fixed costs, or you could say it's making a loss of £1,000. And actually, it can be quite useful to talk about it being a contribution of £1,000 because that gives you a little bit more information. And now we're going to assume that we're selling our t-shirts for £2 each, and I'm sure you can again guess what is going to happen. So we're getting our revenue coming in, but it's not actually enough to cover even our variable costs. And here you would straight away be talking about the business making a loss of £3,000. So using contribution can allow you to be a little bit more specific about this loss making situation. It doesn't make business sense to carry on selling products if you're not covering your variable costs. So each extra item that you sell, you're going to be making bigger losses because of that. So it makes sense to stop selling, stop producing at that point. So you see people or businesses doing that in the very short term where they're continuing. And we've had a really good example recently of at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, where you've got airlines that are flying around with one passenger or no passengers on the plane. And that obviously doesn't make sense if you're looking at the profit and loss on each flight, because what is happening is they're not getting any revenue coming in, and they're certainly not going to cover the costs even of the fuel of flying that flight. And that was a particular distortion because of the way the slots are regulated. And so then there was a lot of pressure on government in the media to change that. And they took away the restrictions on slots, and lo and behold, airlines stopped flying as many flights because it really doesn't make economic sense. However, it's a slightly different situation when you are starting to make a contribution towards your fixed costs, because many businesses have made quite long-term decisions. So if you're a shop or a restaurant and you've bought a premises or you're renting a premises, you might have a 20-year mortgage that you've got to pay payments off each month, or you might have a 10-year lease and you're committed to paying a rent payment each month. And in these circumstances, even though you might be making a loss, as long as you're making a contribution to your fixed cost, it makes sense for the business to keep trading as long as possible, because the business owners aren't racking up as much debt or loss as if they just stopped trading completely. They are contributing towards their fixed costs, so they're helping to pay off a little bit. So there is a distinction between the sort of different levels of loss that you're making, and it's that cut-off between whether you're covering any of your fixed costs or not that is useful to keep an eye out for. Thank you.